Hello, my name is Dave Ollila. I'm an SDSU Extension Sheep Field Specialist, and today we have with us Kiley Whited and Mitch Faulkner, who are with the USDA NRCS Range Management Specialists. And the topic we're talking about today is the upcoming sweet clover production that we're looking for this year. Based on last year's rainfall and the amount of moisture we had through the winter, we have an expectation of a heavy sweet clover year. So we want to use the monitoring techniques and apply those to predict what we would expect for sweet clover production. And as we know, in sweet clover years, we certainly have a multi-fold production compared to normal years of rangeland growth, and there's opportunity to take advantage of that production if we can recognize it soon enough and implement that into a grazing plan for that current year to utilize that additional biomass, increase your stocking rates or the duration in which you would graze that particular pasture to take advantage of that multi-fold production that you don't normally see in a normal year. And from that, then you can allow other pastures to rest. You can utilize the advantages and opportunities of the sweet clover to improve your soil health in the rangelands with the characteristics of the sweet clover and what they bring to the prairie landscape.
The South Dakota Drought Tool is accessed through the USDA NRCS South Dakota website. By simply clicking on range and drought information on our homepage, you can access the most up-to-date drought and production resources. Using the South Dakota Drought Tool, NRCS develops up-to-date maps of drought and production status across South Dakota. The production data is provided for both projected peak production if moisture and precipitation is at least normal through July 1st, or when we usually consider to have peak production on our grasslands in South Dakota. Current conditions are also provided as well. The South Dakota Drought Tool utilizes Excel to predict production based on your location and the last 24 months of precipitation. Also provided on the website are complete drought tool instructions. By clicking the South Dakota Drought Tool and either opening it directly or saving it to your computer, anyone with an internet access can use the South Dakota Drought Tool not only to evaluate drought, but also to evaluate the productivity of your grassland based on moisture conditions. The South Dakota Drought Tool uses precipitation data from climate stations where they exist in counties in South Dakota. Nearly every county is represented. For this example, I'm going to use Butte County and the Belle Fourche Weather Station. The Drought Tool will allow you to go back and evaluate production conditions from 1994 to the present. By simply maintaining the date as now, I can look at the production conditions for the Belle Fourche area as they currently exist according to the Drought Tool. Once selected, those weather stations provide detailed precipitation information by month for the past 24 months. This is called a rolling precipitation calendar. So what we're looking at here is June 2012 precipitation data all the way through current or May 2014 precipitation. It's automatically received from the internet. Below this table, a user can insert their own precipitation information if it's collected from their own ranch or operation. They can put in all 24 months of precipitation and use that information to use the Drought Tool to estimate their current production situation, or can select month by month to override the information that automatically comes in from the weather stations. By clicking Next, the Drought Tool makes an estimate of production based on the past 24 months of precipitation. As you can see, the current conditions are favorable for grassland production, and the Drought Tool is no longer really a drought tool. It's a production estimate tool at this point. The South Dakota Drought Tool can provide for planning for forage or grassland surplus situations. In this example, we've got about 20% of normal production. This can be used in conjunction with other monitoring activities that can help to redesign or design your grazing plan, such as periods when yellow sweet clover may be especially abundant. In this situation, with around 120% of normal productivity, with the addition of sweet clover, we could easily be looking at situations where productivity is abundant and potentially as high as 150% of normal production. So in this way, the South Dakota Drought Tool is allowing us to plan and potentially be able to realize the opportunities that are out there on grazing lands. The South Dakota Drought Tool also provides some visual information regarding a precipitation comparison of the historic average to the current precipitation conditions, and also provides a visual display of the average high temperature comparison for each month compared to the current. By clicking the Finish button on the South Dakota Drought Tool, we get a full display of our expected current production and the projected status of percent peak production. This year, conditions have been very good for grass growth, and so were last summer's. So it looks like we're going to be at about 20% of normal production. The South Dakota Drought Tool also gives us a suggested percent of normal stocking rate, and at this point, it's recommending no adjustment because we're at least probably 20% of our normal production. The final summary page of the South Dakota Drought Tool offers both the precipitation comparison and the high temperature comparison, as well as a drought contingency plan that can be customized for a user's operation or ranch. It breaks drought into 3 phases. A normal phase, which is at least 95% of normal production, where drought conditions are not currently occurring and do not appear to be likely to occur. Phase 2, or a risk status phase, which is when conditions are between 85 and 95% of normal production, and a drought status phase, which is drought conditions are most likely to occur, probably already are occurring, and we are already seeing an impact to our grasslands in South Dakota. Each of these risk statuses provide a place for a customized drought plan to be written and documented. It could include anything from early culling and weaning of livestock, alternative feeds and forages, herd consolidations that might provide for some extra recovery and rest to grasslands by having shorter occupation periods and longer periods of rest, or any other sort of management strategy that might help conserve forage resources on grasslands. Also within the Drought Tool is a list of drought contingency plan guidance to help give the user some ideas or some recommendations of strategies that might be implemented on your operation during each of the 3 drought statuses.
So we extracted a couple sweet clovers out of the South Dakota prairie, and if you look at the nature of the taproot, this is from the vegetative growth from the first year's development and over winter. We're in early spring expecting, as the temperatures warm, that the production of the sweet clover will become even greater as we see our vegetation start to grow. But this plant has set itself up to really produce and perform within the next 4 to 6 weeks. Considerable lateral roots coming off to help extract nutrients out of the soil, but the properties of this taproot allow for deeper penetration into the subsoil, and a number of things happen from that in the case that we create macropores into the soil that, when these roots decompose and rot, will wick water through that soil profile, not only holding more water in the soil, but also supplying the plants that live in that area. Additionally, these roots are capable of drawing nutrients such as potassium, nitrogen, and phosphorus up from those subsoils into the growth zones of the grasses to better benefit them when these sweet clovers have completed their growth cycle. If you notice on the roots and next to them, there's little nodules that are developed by the bacterium that are symbiotic with the sweet clover root and develop a nitrogen fixing occurrence. And in this case, the sweet clovers can produce easily 60 to 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre that they can bring up into that growth zone and provide for the prairie grasses. So the sweet clover root does a number of things. It loosens the soil for better tilth and soil structure, brings nutrients up into the growth zone for other plants, and at the same time increases the water holding capacity for the soils themselves.
It's early May and we're here in western South Dakota on native rangeland, and we're evaluating the conditions, and we're looking at the sweet clover cover and density on this site. If this were indicative of our entire pasture, we've counted up about 22 individual sweet clover plants just within this 3x3 frame. So that's about a little more than 2 plants per square foot in there. And on a site like this, what we'd expect on a normal year is about 2,000 pounds per acre of forage production. And if the conditions are right, this type of heavier density of sweet clover, we could see over 4,000 pounds per acre of actual above ground available forage with that sweet clover production. And I think one of the things that we need to keep in mind there is that that's production that's going to be available, but probably is only going to be available to the animal for a limited time. It's only going to be palatable and really have that optimum nutrient content starting now going into later spring up until the early to middle summer, probably sometime the end of June. We've moved on to a little different site from the one that we looked at previously. This site up here has a little bit less sweet clover density, and we've just laid out a 3x3 wooden rule to kind of give ourselves some perspective on what kind of area we're looking at. And within this 3x3 rule, we've counted about 6 sweet clover plants. And while it doesn't have the density that we saw in the other site, this area would probably still be expected to produce possibly 50% of the site potential if the conditions are right, an extra 50% of production versus normal. And on this site again, probably we would see around 2,000 pounds per acre of production on a normal year. So we could add potentially another 1,000 pounds of production of sweet clover this year if the conditions are right. They are pretty spread out. It's fairly sparse, but one thing that we'll see the sweet clover do is it'll really fill in and it'll really bunch out and be very productive on a site like this. So even though it doesn't look quite as productive, we could still see a significant increase in available forage in the spring and early summer from the sweet clover.
One concept that's valuable when we talk about monitoring or inventorying grazing lands is the idea of a key area. A key area is simply an area of a pasture that's representative of the pasture as a whole. And what we hope is that we can look at the attributes of that key area and the changes that are going on there and extrapolate that to what's going on the pasture as a whole. So when we want to select a key area for monitoring, what we're looking at is an area that has similar soils and a similar potential vegetation and potential production. So most of this pasture would be what we would call a clayey ecological site. That being the case, we've kind of selected this hilltop right here, probably about a 3 to 5 acre size, as our key area where we'll conduct most of our monitoring and inventory in this pasture.
Web Soil Survey is available through the South Dakota USDA NRCS website and is a tool that can be used to map and evaluate the soils on your operation. By simply selecting the Start Web Soil Survey button from our web page, you can access Web Soil Survey. The first thing that a user needs to do is to determine their area of interest. This can be either done by navigating through aerial imagery of the county or selecting your section, township, and range. Once you have the location where the area of interest is located. You can zoom in or out using the zoom buttons on the toolbar. So by zooming into that area, the user can use the area of interest button to draw a polygon over the area where the soils are of interest. And just by drawing and clicking, a polygon can be created. Once the area of interest of polygon is created, by clicking the Soils Map tab at the top of the page, a soils map is generated. And the map unit symbol for each of the soils is then placed over the area of interest, along with the soil map unit boundaries. Now that I've created my area of interest within Web Soil Survey and have created my soils map, I can utilize the Soil Data Explorer tab to look at soil properties and qualities ranging from the chemical properties or the water features of those soils that exist within my area of interest, and a variety of information associated with the suitabilities and limitations of those soils. Everything from building site development to land management, the productivity of those soils for both cropland, grazing land, and water management or other land classifications. There's a variety of ratings that are included within Web Soil Survey, and the best way to discover what's in there is just to utilize the program and explore it. Within the vegetative productivity, suitability, and limitation rating, we can view the ratings for those soils within our area of interest. Those ratings include the pounds per acre per year for each of those map unit symbols. These can be used to develop a grazing management plan and can also be used as a basis to interpret what production might be on those sites. And in situations where we have high production or good moisture situations, along with potentially high sweet clover production, we can look at what sort of extra productivity we might expect that year. Using the Ecological Site Assessment tab, an ecological site map can be made, and also an evaluation of each of the primary ecological sites within the area of interest. By selecting your representative plant community on those soils, we can view plant community information and the expected productivity based on a normal year, an above average year, or a below average year. In this example, for a western wheatgrass green needlegrass plant community on a clay ecological site, we can expect average productivity of around 1,800 pounds per acre. By clicking the Shopping Cart tab and Checkout, a custom soil resource report is generated. The custom soil resource report includes a soil map for the area of interest, as well as a legend and the number of acres in the area of interest, along with the number of acres and percent of each soil map unit. The custom soils report provides a brief description for each of the individual soil components that exist within the soil map units within the area of interest. There's a lot of information to explore within Web Soil Survey. So if you need help or assistance, please contact your local USDA NRCS Service Center.
One key step in any grazing plan is to monitor the changes in the resources over time. Once we've established our key areas in a pasture based on the representativeness of that area to the pasture as a whole, we need to decide two things. First, what aspects of the pasture do we want to monitor? And second, what methods do we want to use? On South Dakota rangelands, annual forage production can vary considerably between years, especially in a year with sweet clover. So one aspect that we'd want to look at is that annual production. Two common ways of looking at annual production are to clip and weigh vegetation in a hoop and to use the pasture stick.
So what I'm working with here is what we call the South Dakota Grazing Stick. And there's a lot of information and tools that are on this stick, but one of the handiest is a tool that we use to estimate the amount of production that we have on rangeland using the average height of grasses. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this grazing stick and I'm going to measure the grasses as I walk across this pasture. And as I take a step, I'm just going to bend down and I'm going to measure the grass that's at the toe of my boot, the grass that's closest to the toe. And so I'm just going to get an average of the height of the grass that's out here. Just keep measuring. Usually it's good to maybe take about 20 measurements, get a good average. So now that I've got a pretty confident estimate of what my average grass height is on this site, all I need to do then is to turn to this table on the grazing stick and I can get an idea based on stand density, either a normal or an excellent stand density, and also based on the type of plant community I'm working with, be it native warm season and cool season grass mix rangeland like I'm on now, or it could be a cool season and legume type pasture situation. I can take a look at some figures on this stick and I can come up with the estimated air dry weight in pounds per inch of grass height. And so what I came up with was about 5 inches on average of grass height on this site. And I just go down this table and I found native mixed cool and warm season grasses. And so on a normal type of stand, we could have somewhere between 100 and 200 pounds of air dry production per inch of grass height. And on an excellent stand density, we could be looking at 200 to 300 pounds per inch of grass height. Just going off of experience, I might estimate that this stand is somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 pounds per inch of grass height. Had about 5 inches on average. So right now, the above ground standing biomass, by my estimation of grass production, is somewhere in the neighborhood of 750 pounds of air dry weight per acre. And this year so far, it's early May, we've got about 75% probably of our growing season left to go. Maybe I could estimate if everything stays normal and we have average at least moisture conditions and growing conditions, possibly 2,400 pounds per acre of total production that we might see on this site this year. One of the other things, I'd used some personal judgment and some professional judgment on the stand density. It is always good if you're unsure to go ahead and then after you've made the measurements, go ahead and clip and weigh that site if you really want to be calibrated to figure out what your stand densities are on sites that you commonly encounter on your operation.
So another common way that we use to estimate annual forage production is called the clip and weigh method. And what I've done is that within my key area, I want to use a standard size hoop and clip and weigh all of this year's vegetation that's inside of it. So what I've got is a hoop. This one happens to be 1.92 square feet, which is just a nice standard number for me to multiply those numbers out and get a per acre, pounds per acre basis. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use these clippers and I'm going to clip everything that's above the ground down to the ground surface. I'm going to put it in the bag and I'm going to weigh it. Then I'm going to take the hoop within my key area again and throw it anywhere from 2 to 4 more times. And I'm going to do the same thing and I'm going to end up averaging those numbers. So I'm just going to go ahead and start clipping everything and put it in the bag. So again, I've clipped all species of forage growing within the hoop. It's important to make the distinction between those plants, individual plants that are rooted within the hoop and those that are without. So if there's overlapping leaves from plants that are rooted outside, you don't include those. You include only those that are growing or rooted within inside the hoop. So then I want to take those and I put them in a paper bag. Use a standard 100-gram scale or something similar. Try and get the weight in grams. And when the wind stops, I'm looking at about 44 grams. I know this bag weighs, you want to subtract for the bag, and I know this bag weighs about 15 grams. So that would give me about 29 grams. Then you dump out the bag, and you staying within your key area, you randomly throw the hoop again anywhere from 2 to 4 more times, and you do the same thing. Then you have to end up taking that number in this size hoop, you want to end up multiplying by 50. That gives you a rough pounds per acre measurement of your forage production within this key area, and then you're saying that that's representative of the pasture as a whole. Some adjustments that need to be made with that, though, are how much of the forage growth of this year has already been completed, how much is actually the dry weight of the green weight that I've had, and if it's been grazed, how much of it has actually been grazed. If you need help coming up with any of those numbers, it's best to check with your local SDSU Extension Office or your local Natural Resources Conservation Office for help with that adjustments.
For more information and ways that we can help ranchers monitor and develop grazing plans, not just in drought times and periods, but during the entire production life, certainly contact the USDA NRCS in your county or SDSU Extension at one of its regional centers for assistance in developing grazing plans and pasture monitoring.